and regular meeting agenda for December 17th at 11 a.m. And we'll call the meeting to order. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll open it up for public comment. Is there any public comment?
I have a comment from Eileen Cooper, for which I printed 10 copies. I think it's actually in your pile that I handed to you accidentally.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So,
I think that's on the consent agenda anyway.
we'll put that into the record. A letter from Eileen Cooper regarding the RTIP, and it's rather lengthy, so we won't read it.
Yeah.
And so, if no other public comment. I'll close public comment. And we'll take note of all the commissioners who are present and adjourn to the Policy Advisory Committee and move on to the consent agenda. The minutes of November 12th, 2015. Item B, Climate Change and Stormwater Management Plan. Item C, approve agency funding agreement with Crescent City Harbor District. And item D, adopt resolution 2015-26 for the Regional Transportation Improvement Program. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
We have a poll vote?
We do.
Oh, I'm sorry, for the resolution. So could you please pull the vote?
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Commissioner Hawley?
Yes.
Commissioner Finnegan?
Yes.
Commissioner Hemmingson?
Yes.
Public Advisory Member Price? And Chairman Murray?
Yes, thank you. Okay, that is adopted and approved. We'll move on to the policy and administrative section. Item E, consider request by Redwood Coast Transit Authority for California Transit Security Grant Program funding. Tamara?
We have had challenges with failure to report notices from Cal OES regarding these transit funds, and we met probably over a year ago, a 2+2 meeting with our chair and vice chair and the transit chair and vice chair, Mr. Wall and myself, getting together to figure out a solution. Mark Wall at that time indicated that he would catch up on his reporting, but he today, as of a month ago, hadn't done so. There are other things that are happening in the other area where he provides services in Lake County, and Cal OES has asked for Lake County to return these funds for, I think, 3 consecutive years of funds to them. So in light of all of the activities and the failure to report notices and absent jurisdiction to do anything, because these are transit funds and they go for transit security purchases and they pass through the Transportation Commission but don't land in our hands for decision making. So I talked with our counsel Bob Black about how to give us the authority to report directly on these funds and give us the ability to do so. Right now, I don't have the information I need, even if I were to choose to report and had the authority to report on behalf of transit. I don't have the information that I need. For example, I don't know what their procurement process is. I don't know what products they've purchased. I know what their applications say, but I don't know when things happened with funding. I don't know the timely use of the funds. All of those things are in the hands of the recipient organization. It's the same way that I couldn't report on behalf of the county for the funds that county receives that pass through the Transportation Commission, nor could I report for a tribe or the city or any other jurisdiction that is a recipient of funds that passes through the Transportation Commission. So in terms of choice, the Rebel Coast Transit Authority is the only eligible recipient organization in our region for these funds. And so it's not a decision about where they go, it's a process in place that we're required to follow. So, you know, I have concerns because of the actions taken by CALA OES, and in addition to those actions, they've requested a different point of contact. They've essentially said that, you know, we're so frustrated with the lack of reporting and your continual promises to report and failure to do so that we want a different person to communicate with. So the conclusion for that from me is that, well, I can't report on a different agency's funding and how they're moving forward with their process, and I went to council and asked for advice. And council advised that we add the paragraph that I highlighted in your packet that allows me to go back to the Transit Authority to seek assurances from Transit Authority that the reporting will be done in a timely manner. So the Transit Authority can't be a recipient of funds, of state or federal funds, without having the obligation to report on them. And so instead of reporting to Cal OES, they're going to need to report to me, and I will forward the reports to Cal OES because Cal OES has said they will no longer accept communication from Mr. Wall. They want a different point of contact. So, you know, I guess my goal is to protect our community and these funds. They're not a lot of funds. They're about $20,000 a year. But it's a lot of money. I mean, for us as individuals, $20,000 of funds is a lot of money. And it's also very difficult to get money. It buys things like emergency generators for the transit facility, perhaps video surveillance equipment to protect against vandalism or theft or whatever. So it's areas, it provides funding for areas that is really hard to fund. So Bob, if you'd like to add anything?
I think you've covered it very well. I'm here for questions if you have any.
Sure. So who's responsible? If they're not going to talk to Mr. Wall and we don't have the authority, are you suggesting that we take the authority or that we have that commission be individually responsible? Well,
the language in this resolution recommends that we accept authority after receiving assurances from the Transit Authority Board that we will receive regular reporting. So if they don't give us assurances in a way that's acceptable to us, then we can not allow the expenditure to happen and return the funds to Cal OES.
Okay, so the Transit Authority has Mr. Wall do the reporting, who is shown to be grossly incompetent, okay, as far as OES is concerned and everybody else. So asking them for their assurances is like Groundhog Day.
It feels like that sometimes.
So what changes?
Well, we could, for example, put in a request for assurances that they hire somebody to do the assurances outside of the contract that they have with Mark Wall. That they could...
if necessary.
If necessary.
I suggest you add that verbiage.
It's my understanding that Mr. Wall stated that he is no longer working for the Transit Authority, and some of the correspondence that you sent to us?
He told Cal OES in writing that he will no longer be responsible for the funds for Rebel Coast Transit Authority and that he is continuing his work with Lake Transit. It appears that that is retroactive of however long ago, but he may intend to continue to work for Rebel Coast Transit Authority through his contract ending June 30th. He has indicated that he will not renew his services contract beyond June 30th, but this doesn't protect us from the problem that we have today. So in looking at this problem, I know it's a sticky problem, but I don't want to just walk away from the funding on behalf of the community. So I'm trying to figure out a way with some kind of reasonable assurance that we can keep the funding, give Cal OES assurance that we will continue to report on the funding so they don't ask for a return of the funding like they did in Lake, and give us a chance to resolve our challenges with the Rebel Coast Transit Authority's reporting in whatever way seems an assurance to me and my board that it's going to happen.
So who would have to return the funds?
The Transportation Commission is the holder of the funds at this time. But if Rebel Coast Transit Authority has spent the money but has not processed invoices, we have no way of knowing that. So that would come out of the Transit Authority's budget. Now, keeping in mind, I mean, on one hand, that seems, well, it's not our budget, but it is public funding, and I think any public funding that's lost is, you know, is not good for our community. So there's much of this that's outside my jurisdiction right now. More of it, with your authority, will be my obligation to follow up with Transit Authority and get some assurance to the Transportation Commission. You know, I really just don't want the community to lose the money.
But right now, it sort of seems like the Transit Authority is operating without an executive director.
It does appear like that at times. But that's not, in the same way that if the county didn't have an executive director, or a tribe, or the city, or whatever, that's not within my jurisdiction to comment on. It's a completely separate JPA that, you know, it's just not my area of business.
Right, I'm just saying, but, I mean,
It's-
the
I'm-
way to,
yeah.
we're kind of, it's a
I'm quite
conundrum, I
concerned.
guess.
You know, I really am. I'm quite concerned about the Transit Authority's ability to, you know, deliver its audit on time, you know, all of these things that it's obligated to do between now and the end of June. And, but again, that, you know, it's a different JPA and outside my responsibility.
You've been telling this for over a year now.
Right, and I have been in direct communication with their board chair on many occasions within the last 6 weeks. So I know that their board chair is informed about what's going on. I don't know what the whole board knows.
Is there anybody here that's on the RTA?
It used to be, originally it was.
Right.
Who's the board chair?
Martha McClure.
And do they have plans on replacing that you don't know?
They're running a request for proposal process right now with the help of Black and Rice in the same way that we did 2 years ago for my own position. So they have a request for proposals posted, and they have received some inquiries. I think that they will have some choices to make in that area, and they will hire new staff by the end of June. But a lot can happen between now and the end of June that, you know, I'm just trying to make sure that our community doesn't lose the money. So, you know, I mean, we could send a letter requesting that, you know, they have their books open to us. We could hire a consultant on their behalf. You know, I mean, the Transportation Commission has a lot of leeway about the TDA funds and how they're allocated. And if we increased an administrative portion and used that funding to hire a consultant, it would adjust the formula from Rebel Coast Transit Authority's budget. But all of these things, you know, I'm hoping to avoid. That would be a step that we would take, say, in January or February if they continue to fail to report. The next reporting requirement would be in February, I think the first week in February, so the reports would be necessary to come to me, I would say the second week in January, to make sure that I have time to read them, review them, get any questions answered, turn them around, and send them to OES. So just because they're not reporting directly to OES does not alleviate them from the obligation to report on their state and federal funding. Everybody who receives that money has to report.
It seems to me this is a very small part of a very bigger picture, because we know that, I mean, it looks to me like we're going to run into the same issue with the audit, because he's not even going to be there to give them any information. So it looks to me like you better get ahead of this reporting issue.
Well,
On a lot of
Could I-
different fronts. I mean, if you're not gonna hire anybody until June, there's not gonna be anybody there to get the information for the audit, it doesn't look to me like, so I don't know.
Well, the situation's maybe a little more complicated. I don't think it's correct that Mr. Wall is completely disengaged. In fact, RCTA had a meeting yesterday. I was not there, but I believe he was active in creating the agenda, and he was, whether he was physically present or just present by phone, I'm not sure, but he was involved in the meeting. So it's not a, it's more of a gray area as to the current guidance for RCTA. I think there are some options where somebody could be hired much earlier than June, but it's up to the RCTA board to, to make that happen. And I've also had some conversations in which that option has been elevated higher on the agenda. So I think the point with the resolution that you have in front of you is we're trying to have the best of two worlds. We're trying to bring the funds into the community, but make sure we don't get in a situation where they are expended and then we have to repay because there's been inadequate reporting. So this resolution basically gives you the judgment call as to whether the reporting is going to be adequate. And once you're comfortable with that, which we understand you would not be today because no solution is in place, but once you're comfortable that the reporting will be sufficient, then you can green light the expenditure of the money and things will fall into place. In the meantime, we have the money. The auditor, the funds pass through the auditor's office, and unless you green light the expenditure, they will be held there. If there's a need to turn them back, they'll be sitting in the auditor's accounts.
Okay, but we're not in a situation to where, because of failure to report, we would have to repay money that's already been expended.
Well,
Okay.
not in this context.
And if so, where would that money come from?
We aren't in that position at this time, but I think we're at a precipice of being in that position.
Well, if it's having to authorize money to be spent, then yes, pass the resolution, be sure that we're doing the right thing so we don't get in that position. My question is, because he hasn't been reporting for so long, have there been expenditures that somebody might be liable for repaying, and if so, where does that money come from?
Well, there are
Or is that a non-issue?
It's very much an issue, so it's not a non-issue. I'm just a little uncomfortable because there are some things that I learned just this week through our audit process that indicate, and I don't have all the details, but I feel obligated to share it with you because this issue is coming up, that Revo Coast Transit Authority spent money out of this budget on very appropriate equipment. They're doing what they said they were going to do. There's not a misuse of the funding, but the auditor's office pulled the money out of the Transit Authority's account and not out of the Transportation Commission account, which of course they couldn't do without sending the request for payment to me and it going through CBH. But something happened. I think Mark was taking a look at them again when he was filling out his reports, and I think this because of the timing of things. And he directed the auditor's office, requested the auditor's office backdate a payment to June 30th from that account and repay the Transit Authority account from the Transportation Commission account. And the auditor's office did that. And they did it without the Transportation Commission's, not mine, not CBH's, not any signature of any commissioner. So it's going to be some sort of an audit finding about these funds that is going to highlight this problem even greater, that Mark Wall, nor anybody in the community, shouldn't be able to contact the auditor's office directly and have them move money out of a Transportation Commission account, backdate it to June, and us not be informed about it. Now, we would know about it because it happened within this quarter. CBH would absolutely know about it when they did the quarter reconciliation. I mean, it's, Matt is very sharp. He would not miss this. But because it was backdated to June, he didn't know, he would have no way to know about it. I certainly didn't know about it. So there are sort of multiple levels of challenge and some of it I'm just learning about right now. So I mean, I feel like I'm springing this on you, and in some ways it was sprung on me a couple days ago, but I'm certainly not comfortable having this conversation without sharing with you other things that have happened just this week regarding the audits. So when we talk about our audits, this will be in our audit that this happened, and there will be some kind of corrective action, something taken at the recommendation of the auditor. So if, for instance, Cal OES asked for the money back today, the Transportation Commission has 2/3 of the money, and 1/3 of the money has been forwarded and already spent with the Transit Authority. The Transit Authority would have to find a way to pay back that money. And ultimately, I suppose ultimately the Transportation Commission would, because we can attempt to hold the Transit Authority responsible for the funding that passes through us. But if there's no mechanism in place or nobody with the Transit Authority agrees to do that, then the Transportation Commission would have to find a way to repay those funds.
And the short of it is, this resolution would accommodate that in the future.
This resolution would give us some opportunity to get some assurance from the Transit Authority before we agreed any more money was
And
spent.
there's nothing we can do about the past, that's the past.
Right.
Okay. I move the recommendation.
Second.
Any public comment on this matter? Any more discussion? So, Bob, is any other further?
No.
Okay, could you please, and that's for, is that for Resolution 2015-26? David?
Yes,
Okay. Could you please poll the vote?
with the added verbiage.
Commissioner Hawley?
Yes.
Commissioner Hemmingson?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Commissioner Finnegan?
Yes.
Public Advisory Member Price?
Yes.
And Chairman Murray?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I need some clarification about the added verbiage.
That was recommended by council to be put in there.
Oh, I think
Okay.
she already put it in.
Okay.
It's already in there, thank you. Okay.
Okay, so on to discussion items, Tamara?
In the last page of your agenda packet is a very preliminary draft overall work program for 2016-17. And through the TAC process, we have conversations about our next year's work, starting about now. Every year, we generally come to some agreement in December or January. I start drafting the document in January, February. It's approved by Caltrans at the end of March. We adopt it by resolution in April for the year starting July 1. That's a general overview of what happened. So this is very preliminary conversation about the discretionary items. The data book is a discretionary item. Our community really appreciates the data book that we received from CSU Chico. I think it's a good value. The TAC is recommending that. The other item that's of significance is the Elk Valley Corridor, the Elk Valley Multimodal Corridor Plan. And that's a document to consider multimodal transportation on Elk Valley from the point of the recent completed construction at, I think, Elk Valley and Humboldt Road, and moving toward Highway 199 at the opposite end. It's a high priority project for the county, but we have no idea about what the public thinks. We haven't scoped the project. We don't know what the right-of-way issues are. You know, we have no planning level cost estimate. So this document would include significant reach out to the public, especially, but not only the public in that area, you know, other folks who might be impacted, like trucking. You know, some folks use it as a truck route, and certainly targeting the community who live along and frequent that road. So it'll give us an idea about where that project might fall in a regional transportation priority without any planning level of scoping we don't really know anything about it. We're all just guessing what it might be. So this document would give us some preliminary answers, planning level projections, cost projections about including pedestrian and bike lanes on Elk Valley Road on that half of the road.
To clarify, it's from Howland Hill. and Elk
Holland
Valley.
Hill,
Yeah,
right,
okay.
yeah. That,
Going to one day.
that intersection
Yes.
there, that where the construction stops. Somewhat recent construction.
Good.
So the TAC, no other TAC members had anything to bring forward for next year's scope of work that they thought was more important than this. So it's the TAC recommendation that we move forward with this very preliminary, budget that we have sort of outlined here today. And so a next step would be, with your approval, a next step would be that I would continue to refine the work elements, the scope of work and the budget, approaching all of those upcoming deadlines before the year July 2016.
Did the TAC take into consideration the condition of the road itself?
All of those things will
Oh,
be
okay,
considered.
all right.
Yeah, all of those things will be considered at in the planning level documents.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
thanks. Anything else? Okay. The 197, 199 update?
I have nothing to report at this time on 199.
Okay. I don't know if we've heard anything on, have they been able to retrieve the 2 victims from the river? Does anybody know?
I don't have any information on that. I did send a letter to, I would think not, given the river
As of
level.
yesterday, no.
Yeah, I don't think that there's been any forward
Okay.
progress on that, very serious accident. I have sent a request for information from Caltrans about guardrail in
Good.
that
Okay,
area,
good.
which is something that came up from the search and rescue comment
Right.
in the triplicate, and so I thought that we should get more information. I don't know, Jason, you maybe didn't have enough time to take a look at that, but I thought, we should get a report on that.
Yeah, that'll be forthcoming, but since it's still pending. Since it's still pending and they haven't removed the car, they haven't, they have to finalize those reports first. And then probably by next meeting, there'll be something from Caltrans.
Yeah, I asked for something like a safety analysis, to take a look at the accident rate in that location, and, if modifications to the roadway would be helpful or warranted.
Yeah, I've gotten a number of comments from community members saying there's guard rails all the way up and down that road, and why not there? So that'll be good to get that report. Right.
Thanks. And then last chance grade. Anybody?
Anybody who's part of the stakeholder process would like to report on that?
What, do you want me to spill the beans and say the white paper was was issued, but the congressman hasn't decided whether he wants to make it public?
He will make it public according to John Driscoll, his area representative, but not until after the holidays.
Which,
It's kind
he
of,
asks for people to weigh in, and I think people ought to weigh in. It's just bullshit. We're under tremendous community scrutiny. Everybody worked towards a final product. The final product is out there. It's been printed and disseminated to members of the work group, and you're going to hold on to it?
Well,
That's part of the problem we got with the grandstanders, right? Why don't you just throw us in the fire?
Well, I did call and express concern because the document was widely distributed but not publicly distributed. So I'm expecting that many, many members of the public have that document, even by the time I caught up with John Driscoll yesterday at 1 o'clock. I mean, if it was released early yesterday morning by 1 o'clock, given the lengthy list, and he understands that. I think that he's just taking a look at how the congressman's office can put together a press release and handle the comments during the holiday season, and given the timeline that they have now.
And the suggestion would be is
Just-
distribute it.
Right.
Make it public. It already is. It's not stamped confidential.
Right.
And develop some sort of a not a public hearing, but a press release or press on next steps
Right.
after the congressman reviews it. That's,
Well, I'm hoping that you sent those comments and suggestions to Mr. Driscoll. If you'd like for me to do it on your behalf after the meeting, I can do that.
oh, it'd be excellent.
Okay.
Okay. All right,
member,
I
I'd like
think
that
that the commission would appreciate that, so.
So both our city and county representatives are making that recommendation. Thank
Well,
you.
Yeah, I think
Okay. Okay.
that's a great suggestion, so. Thank you for being so forthright, David.
Oh, I'm not used to doing that.
Yeah, me either.
Any other comments or reports from the commissioners?
I just have a comment, I guess, on, it really concerns me about Redwood Coast Transit Authority. There seems to be a disconnect between you and their director, and it seems like there should be a little better working relationship. And I don't quite understand why either of us has to put up with that.
Well, I don't think that there's any personality issue between me and Mr. Wall. I don't think that there's a disconnect. What happens is I get the notices along with him about failure to report, about lack of performance, about, the most recent one was between a $1,000 and $5,000 fine and an offer to come in and do the work for us if the state controller's report isn't submitted by, I think, next week. Their state controller's report wasn't submitted on time. So it's a continual indication that I have as your executive director that the work isn't being performed in a timely manner and at a direct cost to the community. So when I go back to Mr. Wall, in the same way that Cal OES has, and time again received promises that weren't followed through with, my choices are to ignore the problem or to elevate it to my board and his board. And I think that I probably ignored the problem for 3 years before it got so serious that I felt like I needed to really start elevating it. That's when we started to get the failure to report notices. So things a little late, that's one thing, but failure to report notices and threats to rescind our money is an entirely different level.
And I understand all that, but why, I guess I can't understand why that board doesn't take some sort of action. And do we need to do more? Do we need to give more information to their board? Are they not getting the information?
Well, I've met
I
on
mean,
several...
we seem to be the responsible party,
Right.
but we have no control.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just don't know how they let that happen. Hopefully this board wouldn't let you do something like that.
Hopefully not.
And I don't see why that board allows their director to not report.
Well, I have been information sharing with their board chair, but I have not been information sharing with their entire board. It's uncomfortable for me to contact an entire board on behalf of the Transportation Commission rather than going to their board chair and their staff. I don't believe that I've ever done that, contacted the County Board of Supervisors as a whole board outside of the, sort of general processes. So, Bob, do you have any comments on that?
What about if this board directed you to do that?
Well, if
Because we just passed a resolution asking for assurances.
right, I will have to type up some type of request to their board for assurances.
I think it's time really for a lot of light and air here. We need to just come out in the open and say what it is that's happening and what our perceptions are. Maybe the best environment would be to have their board come to our board meeting, have a joint board meeting and hash this out. At least everyone would be present, everyone would be hearing the same thing at the same time. And so maybe we can get some resolution together, is what I'm thinking.
Bob,
I
do you
want to
have-
say that we have had both the chair and vice chair, David and myself, with their chair at the time and their vice chair. We've had a meeting with Tamara and a telephone conference with Mr. Wall, and the parties involved. There was resistance by particular one party involved that didn't feel that Mr. Wall was negligent. So, it depends on who was running their agency at the time, or who was chairing their agency at the time. So, some of the board members at the time felt Mr. Wall was doing a good job when we brought these issues up, and so that was part of the roadblock, you might say. So it was,
Well, I think a more significant part of the roadblock is even though many promises were made in that meeting, nothing happened.
and that's the crust of the whole issue, is that there are many promises made, and then nothing happened, and over again.
Well, I believe, based on conversations that I have had with the chair of our CTA, that these issues are supposed to be agendized either at a special meeting to be held in January, or at least at their next regular meeting. And that what I would suggest is that Ms. Layton and myself confirm that is going to be agendized. And if it is agendized, let's take a little more of a hands-off approach to see whether or not they are able to solve their own problems. I mean, it is clear that there is a recruitment going on, and there is an investigation into the contractual terms of Mr. Wall's employment and what the options are for the RCTA board. So those things have been inquired about. I think that it might make sense to allow us to respond based on the apparent effort of our CTA to go forward on their next agenda and help resolve this. In other words, I don't see a need right now for a joint meeting or anything like that. I think that we can handle it on a more, I guess you would say, diplomatic level with staff and with the chair of that board.
The current
Does
chair.
that make sense?
That-
You agree?
So, okay.
So I
All
think-
right. Any other comments or reports? Okay, looks like we better move on, and we will, on the actions and recommendations of the policy committee, will reconvene as the Del Norte Local Transportation Commission, and by poll vote, approve and adopt the actions taken by the policy advisory committee and items listed above. So could you please poll the vote? Oh, I'm sorry, make a motion, yeah. Second? Do we have a second?
Second.
Could you please poll the vote?
Commissioner Hawley?
Yes.
Commissioner Hemmingson?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Commissioner Finnegan?
Yes.
Chairman Murray?
Yes, thank you. And with that, we will adjourn to the next regularly scheduled meeting in January 14th at 2016 at 11 a.m.